What if the medical evidence surrounding the crucifixion tells a completely different story than what we have been taught? Because when forensic pathologists actually examined the historical records, what they found left them with one question nobody could answer today. We are diving into the one piece of medical evidence that has made historians and scientists question everything about that day on the cross. If you want the truth that history tried to bury, subscribe right now, because this is only the beginning. For centuries, the crucifixion of Jesus has been treated as one of the most documented events in ancient history. Churches have been built upon it. Entire civilizations have been shaped by it. And yet, when modern medical science began to look at the physical details surrounding that day on the cross, something unexpected happened. The closer researchers looked, the more questions began to surface. Not questions born out of disrespect or denial, but questions that any honest scientist or historian would be compelled to ask when the evidence does not fully align with the accepted narrative. Let us start with what we know from the historical record. Roman crucifixion was designed to be a slow and agonizing process. Victims were expected to suffer for days before death finally arrived. The Romans were experts at prolonging suffering. They understood the human body, and they knew exactly how to keep a person alive on that cross for as long as possible. Historians and medical professionals who have studied Roman execution methods confirm that death by crucifixion typically took anywhere from 24 hours to several days, depending on the physical condition of the individual, the position of the body, and environmental factors such as heat and dehydration. This is where the first major question arises. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus was on the cross for approximately 6 hours before he was declared dead. 6 hours for a relatively young man in his early 30s who, despite being beaten beforehand, was physically capable of carrying a cross through the streets of Jerusalem. 6 hours is an extraordinarily short amount of time. Forensic pathologists who have studied crucifixion deaths have noted that death in such a short window would be highly unusual and would require either a very specific set of physiological circumstances or an alternative explanation entirely. Dr. Frederick Zujib, a former chief medical examiner in Rockland County, New York, spent decades studying the physical mechanics of crucifixion. His research suggested that death from crucifixion was primarily caused by a combination of hypovolemic shock, exhaustion, and asphyxiation. However, he also noted that the timeline presented in the biblical accounts raises legitimate medical questions that have never been fully resolved by mainstream scholarship. The speed of the reported death, when placed against everything we know about Roman crucifixion physiology, simply does not add up in a straightforward way. Then there is the matter of the spear. According to the Gospel of John, a Roman soldier pierced the side of Jesus with a spear after he had already been declared dead. The text describes blood and water flowing from the wound. For many centuries, this was interpreted as confirmation of death. However, in 1986, a medical report published in the Journal of the American Medical Association examined this passage in detail. The authors, who were medical doctors, argued that the separation of blood and water could be explained by a pericardial effusion, a buildup of fluid around the heart, suggesting that the cause of death was cardiac rupture. But here is where it gets extraordinarily interesting. Other medical researchers have pointed out that the presence of both blood and water flowing from the wound could also be interpreted as evidence that the circulatory system was still partially functioning at the time of the spear thrust. Dr. Peter Smit, a South African medical researcher, published findings suggesting that a truly deceased body would not produce the kind of flow described in the biblical account. He proposed that the physiological description in the text, if taken literally, is more consistent with a living body in a state of severe shock than with a body that had already died. This theory is not new. It has existed in various forms for centuries and has been explored by scholars across multiple disciplines. In the 19th century, German theologian Karl Friedrich Barth proposed what became known as the swoon theory, which suggests that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but instead lost consciousness and was later revived. This theory was expanded upon by scholars like Heinrich Eberhard Gottlob Paulus and later by Carl Venturini, who proposed that Jesus had been given a sedative substance through the sponge offered to him during the crucifixion, which would explain the rapid loss of consciousness. The substance on the sponge is another point of intense scholarly debate. The Gospel accounts describe a sponge soaked in a liquid being offered to Jesus while he was on the cross. The Gospel of Mark refers to it as vinegar, while other translations suggest it may have been a mixture of wine and myrrh. Myrrh has known sedative and analgesic properties and has been used medicinally across the ancient world for thousands of years. Some researchers have proposed that the sponge contained a more potent sedative compound, possibly derived from plants known to ancient healers in the region, which could have induced a state of unconsciousness deep enough to be mistaken for death by observers at the scene. The question of the tomb also deserves careful attention. Joseph of Arimathea, described in all four Gospels as a wealthy and influential man with direct access to Pontius Pilate, requested the body of Jesus and placed it in a private tomb. The tomb was sealed and guarded, but the physical environment of a sealed stone tomb in that region would have maintained a relatively cool and stable temperature, conditions that modern trauma medicine recognizes as potentially beneficial for someone in a state of severe shock or unconsciousness. Historians and medical researchers alike have noted that if a person were in a comatose state rather than clinically dead, the conditions of such a tomb could conceivably support survival for a limited period. It is also worth noting that within Islamic tradition, a belief held by approximately 1,800,000,000 people across the world, Jesus did not die on the cross at all. The Quran states clearly in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 157, that Jesus was neither killed nor crucified, but that it was made to appear so to those who witnessed it. Islamic scholars have interpreted this verse in various ways, but the core theological position remains consistent. Jesus was raised by God before death could occur. This ancient belief, which predates many of the modern medical theories by over 1,400 years, aligns in a striking way with the questions that contemporary researchers are now raising from a purely scientific perspective. None of this is presented here as definitive proof of any particular conclusion. Historians, theologians, and medical scientists continue to debate these questions with great seriousness and with deep respect for the complexity of the evidence. What is undeniable is that the medical evidence surrounding the crucifixion, when examined through the lens of modern forensic science and physiology, raises questions that have never been fully and satisfactorily answered by any single school of thought. The 6-hour timeline, the physiological description of the spear wound, the sedative properties of the substance on the sponge, and the environmental conditions of the tomb all combine to form a body of evidence that deserves honest and open examination. History is not always what we are told it is, and sometimes the most important questions are the ones that powerful institutions have the least interest in answering. What you have just heard is not a conclusion, it is an invitation to look at the evidence with your own eyes, to ask the questions that mainstream history has often preferred to leave unanswered, and to decide for yourself what you believe the truth to be. The researchers, the forensic pathologists, the historians, and the ancient texts do not all agree with each other, but they all agree on one thing. This story is far more complicated than we have been led to believe. The medical evidence does not close the case. If anything, it opens a door that has been sealed shut for 2,000 years. And behind that door, there are questions that every honest human being deserves the right to explore. If this video made you think differently about something you thought you already knew, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Every single week we bring you the evidence, the theories, and the historical records that mainstream sources overlook or ignore entirely. We do not tell you what to believe. We give you what the researchers found, and we let you make up your own mind. Hit that subscribe button right now and make sure you turn on your notifications so you never miss an upload. The next